You will not marry that woman." Graham Whitmore's voice cut through the dining room like a blade. "He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. She has a child, no money, no name. She is beneath us, Grayson. Beneath everything I've built for you." Grayson sat still for a moment. Then he folded his napkin slowly, placed it beside his untouched plate, and stood up. He looked at his father with eyes that held no anger, just something worse. Quiet certainty. "Then I'm beneath you too, Dad." He turned and walked out. His footsteps echoed down the marble hallway, each one fainter than the last, until the front door closed with a sound that was barely a click but felt like a gunshot. Graham sat alone at the long dining table. The candles still flickered against the polished mahogany. His wineglass sat full untouched. 2 plates of food slowly going cold in a room built for 20 but occupied by 1. That dinner was the last time Graham and Grayson spoke for 11 months. And what happened during those 11 months would destroy everything Graham believed about love, about worth, and about the woman he'd called beneath them. And trust me, when you find out what she did for his son, you won't be the same. Join me as we dive into this powerful story. Before we dive deeper, let me tell you something real quick. My neighbor told me last week that nobody watches long story videos anymore. He said I should just quit. I told him I appreciate the honesty, but I believe in this channel and I believe in you. So, do me a favor. Kindly click on that subscribe button below. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this story today. Let's prove him wrong together. Thank you. Now, to understand why Grayson made that choice at the dinner table, we need to go back. Way back. Graham Whitmore was not born rich. Not even close. He grew up in a coal town in West Virginia, the kind of place where the sky was always gray and the houses leaned like they were tired of standing. His father drove trucks for the mining company. His mother cleaned rooms at the only motel in town for $6.50 an hour. When Graham was 8 years old, his parents sat him down at the kitchen table. His mother was crying. His father wouldn't look at him. They told him they couldn't afford to stay together anymore. Not couldn't stay in love. Couldn't afford to. The truck broke down. Medical bills piled up. His mother needed dental work they couldn't pay for. The fights about money got louder every night until the walls of that tiny house couldn't hold them anymore. They'd lost the car first, then the house, then each other. His mother moved Graham into her sister's apartment in Charleston. She worked 3 shifts at a packaging plant just to keep food on the table. Graham wore the same 2 pairs of jeans to school for an entire year. He remembered the smell of the cafeteria on free lunch days. That warm, greasy smell was the best part of his childhood, and he swore right there at 8 years old, sitting on a mattress on the floor of his aunt's spare room, that money would never destroy his family again. He meant it. He meant it with everything he had. By 22, Graham had scraped his way through a state college on scholarships and odd jobs. By 28, he'd talked his way into a real estate firm in Atlanta. By 35, he owned it. By 40, he'd built Whitmore Industries into one of the largest commercial real estate companies in the Southeast. His name went up on buildings across Atlanta, Charlotte, Nashville, and Jacksonville. His signature sat on contracts worth more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Forbes estimated his net worth at $4.2 billion. And somewhere in the middle of all that building, Graham married Eleanor Prescott. She was the daughter of a prominent Atlanta family. Old money. The kind of people who had paintings of their grandparents in the hallway and silver that had been passed down for generations. It was by every measure the right match. 2 families joining forces. Stability meeting stability. Graham believed this was how you protected what you'd built. You married within your class. You kept the foundation strong. And for a while, it worked. Eleanor was graceful and warm. She loved Graham not for his money but for his drive, his hunger, his refusal to give up. She gave him a son, Grayson. And for 14 years, they were a family. Then Eleanor got sick. Breast cancer, stage 3. By the time they found it, Graham threw everything he had at it. The best doctors, the best hospitals, experimental treatments that cost more than most people's houses. He flew specialists in from Europe. He built a medical suite inside their home so Eleanor wouldn't have to spend her final months in a hospital. And through all of it, Eleanor's family stayed. Her parents were there every day. Her sisters took turns sitting by her bed. Graham watched them rally around her, and he believed, truly believed, that this was because of the life he'd provided. The wealth, the stability, the resources. He thought that's what held them all together during the worst of it. When Eleanor died, Grayson was 14. He didn't cry at the funeral. He just stood there in his black suit holding his father's hand, staring at the casket like he was trying to memorize something. Graham held his son's hand so tight his knuckles turned white. And in that moment, gripping his boy's small fingers, Graham made a second vow. He would make sure Grayson never experienced what he'd experienced as a child. No financial ruin, no broken home, no gamble. Grayson would marry someone from the right background, the right family, the right class. Love was fine, but love without financial stability was a house built on sand. Graham had watched his own parents' love crumble under the weight of poverty. He'd watched Eleanor's family stand strong because they had resources. The math was simple to him. Money equaled safety. Class equaled permanence. Everything else was a gamble. Graham had built a fortune, but he'd never built the wisdom to know that money couldn't buy what mattered most. Grayson Whitmore was 32 years old, vice president of Whitmore Industries, and completely lost. Not lost in the way people notice. From the outside, he looked like a man who had everything figured out. Tailored suits. A corner office on the 38th floor of the Whitmore Tower in Midtown Atlanta. A title that made receptionists sit up straighter when he walked in. But the title was hollow, and Grayson knew it. Every major decision still went through his father. Every deal, every acquisition, every hire above a certain level required Graham's signature. Grayson could negotiate a $50 million contract, but he couldn't approve a new coffee vendor for the break room without his father's blessing. He was 32 years old and still asking permission. The women were the worst part. Not the women themselves. They were fine, beautiful, polished, accomplished. But every one of them had been handpicked by Graham. The daughter of a real estate developer in Charlotte. The niece of a banking executive in New York. The granddaughter of a senator. Graham would arrange dinners, galas, charity events, and somehow Grayson would always end up seated next to whichever eligible woman his father had selected that month. The conversations were always the same. Where did you go to school? Oh, Vanderbilt, how lovely. What do you do? Oh, you work with your father, how wonderful. Have you been to the Hamptons this summer? The words changed, but the rhythm never did. It was like a business meeting with better wine. Grayson went on these dates because it was easier than fighting, but he never called any of them back. He never felt anything. Not a spark, not a flutter, not even curiosity. Just a dull, hollow politeness that exhausted him more than 12-hour workdays ever could. His penthouse in Buckhead was beautiful. 3,000 square feet of floor-to-ceiling windows, Italian marble, and designer furniture. And it was the emptiest place Grayson had ever been. The refrigerator held bottled water and old takeout containers. There were no photos on the walls, no books on the coffee table, no sign that anyone actually lived there. It was a showroom, not a home. Some nights, Grayson would stand by the window looking out at the Atlanta skyline. All those lights, all those lives, and feel a loneliness so deep it sat in his chest like a stone. On those nights, he'd think about his mother. He remembered her near the end. Thin and pale in the hospital bed Graham had set up in their home. She'd taken Grayson's hand one afternoon when the light was golden and soft through the curtains. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were sharp, clear, like she was looking straight through him into the man he'd become. Promise me something, baby. Anything, Mom. Find someone who makes you laugh at 6 a.m., not someone who looks good at 6 p.m. Grayson had promised. He'd been 14. He didn't fully understand what she meant then. But now, 18 years later, standing in his empty penthouse, surrounded by expensive nothing he understood perfectly. And he was failing her. Every woman his father chose looked incredible at 6 p.m. Not one of them had ever made him laugh at 6 a.m. Grayson had spent his whole life following his father's blueprint. He was about to tear it up. It started with the house. Not a mansion, not a penthouse, A townhouse. A modest two-bedroom, slightly run-down townhouse in Kirkwood, a neighborhood on the east side of Atlanta where the streets were lined with old oaks and the porches had rocking chairs and the dogs knew each other by name. Kirkwood was not Buckhead. It was not where Whitmores lived. That was exactly the point. Grayson didn't tell his father. He found the listing online, paid cash from his personal savings, and moved in on a Saturday morning in March. He didn't hire movers. He rented a truck and did it himself, or tried to, because the truth was, Grayson Whitmore had never moved anything heavier than a briefcase in his entire life. He was standing in the driveway, wrestling with a box that was clearly too heavy for one person, his shirt already soaked through with sweat, when he heard a voice from behind the fence next door. "You need a hand. Or you just enjoy wrestling with cardboard." Grayson turned around. A woman was standing at the chain-link fence that separated the 2 yards. She had deep brown skin, dark eyes, with a spark of amusement in them, and her hair was pulled up in a messy bun on top of her head. She wore a faded t-shirt with old paint stains on it and cut-off shorts. Her hands had the kind of calluses you get from actual work, not from the gym. And on her hip sat a little girl, maybe 5 years old, with 2 puffball ponytails and chocolate ice cream smeared across half her face. Grayson wiped sweat from his forehead. "I think I overestimated my abilities." The woman laughed. It was a real laugh, loud and unfiltered. She set the little girl down on the porch steps and came around through the gate. "I'm Brenda. That's Zuri. She's going to ask you about 100 questions. Fair warning." Right on cue, Zuri appeared at Grayson's side, looking up at him with enormous brown eyes. "Do you have a dog?" "No, I don't." "Why not?" "I never really thought about it." Zuri looked at him like he'd said he didn't believe in the sun. Everyone should have a dog. Brenda was already grabbing the other end of the box. "Just lift with your legs." "Come on." They carried boxes for the next hour. Brenda didn't ask what he did for a living. She didn't ask where he came from or how much he'd paid for the house. She asked if he had a bottle opener because the one she had at home was broken. She asked if he preferred sweet tea or unsweet. She told him which day the garbage trucks came and warned him that the lady 2 doors down, Mrs. Patterson, would bring him a casserole within 48 hours, whether he wanted one or not. Zuri followed them on every trip, narrating everything. "That box is really big. Mommy, are you sure you can carry that? Mister, do you have any toys in there? Why is your truck so dirty?" Grayson found himself smiling. Not the polished professional smile he wore at board meetings. A real one. The kind that starts before you notice it. When they finished, Brenda wiped her hands on her shorts and called Zuri over. "All right, neighbor, you're officially moved in. Welcome to Kirkwood." "Thank you." "Seriously. I couldn't have done this without you." Brenda shrugged. "That's what neighbors do." She picked Zuri up and headed back through the gate. Zuri waved at Grayson over her mother's shoulder. "Bye, mister. You should really get a dog." Grayson watched them go. Brenda's screen door banged shut behind her, and he could hear Zuri's voice inside, still talking a mile a minute about something. He stood there in his empty driveway for a long moment. The evening air was warm. Crickets were starting up. Somewhere down the block, someone was grilling, and the smell of charcoal drifted over the fence. Nobody here knew who he was. Nobody cared. Brenda hadn't treated him like a Whitmore. She'd treated him like a guy who couldn't carry a box. Grayson went to bed that night in a house that was half empty, but for the first time in years, something inside him felt full. Over the next few weeks, Grayson started to learn who Brenda really was. Not through a background check, not through Google, just through paying attention. Every morning, 5:15 on the dot, he'd hear her front door close. He'd be lying in bed, still half asleep, and he'd hear it. That quiet click. Then her car starting up in the dark. Brenda worked the early shift at a community health clinic near Grady Memorial. She was a registered nurse, not at some fancy private hospital. At a clinic where people showed up without insurance, without appointments, sometimes without shoes. By 6:45, a silver Honda would pull into Brenda's driveway. That was Lorraine, Brenda's mother, a woman in her early 60s, with reading glasses always perched on the top of her head and a purse big enough to live in. Lorraine came every morning to get Zuri dressed, fed, and off to kindergarten. Then she'd stay until Brenda got home. Brenda usually got back around 4:30, sometimes later. And no matter how tired she looked, no matter how heavy her feet dragged up those front steps, the first thing she did was find Zuri every single day. She'd change out of her scrubs, come outside and sit on the porch, while Zuri rode her little pink bicycle up and down the sidewalk. Some evenings Brenda could barely keep her eyes open, but she was there. Grayson learned the rest in pieces. Small conversations over the fence, a comment here, a sentence there. One evening, he was watering the patch of dirt he was pretending was a garden when Brenda came outside with 2 glasses of lemonade. She handed one over the fence. "You're drowning that dirt, you know." "I'm hoping something grows anyway," she laughed. They stood there for a while, quiet and comfortable. Then Brenda said something that stayed with him. Zuri's dad left when she was 3. Just packed a bag one Tuesday and said he needed to figure himself out. That was 2 years ago. He hasn't figured out a phone call since. She said it, matter of fact. No bitterness, no tears. Just a statement of truth, like telling someone the weather. "Does he help out at all?" Grayson asked carefully. "No, no child support, no visits, nothing. I stopped expecting it a long time ago." Grayson was quiet. He didn't know what to say. In his world, problems got solved by writing checks. This wasn't that kind of problem. Over time, he pieced together the numbers. Brenda made about $52,000 a year, good money by most standards. But in Atlanta, with rent eating up nearly half of that, plus student loans from her nursing program, plus childcare costs on the days Lorraine couldn't come, plus food and gas and clothes, for a growing 5-year-old, $52,000 didn't stretch the way people thought it did. And here's something worth knowing. In the United States, there are nearly 11 million single-mother households. 11 million. Black single mothers earn on average about 68 cents for every dollar a white man earns in the same job. Childcare in Atlanta averages over $900 a month. 900. That's more than some people's rent. So when we talk about single mothers struggling, we're not talking about people who made bad choices. We're talking about a system that makes it nearly impossible to do it all alone. And yet millions of women do it, every single day. Brenda was one of them. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for pity. She went to work. She came home. She raised her daughter. She mowed her own lawn. She fixed her own leaky faucet with a YouTube tutorial and a wrench she borrowed from Mrs. Patterson down the street. She helped her neighbors. She checked on Lorraine. She packed Zuri's lunch every night before bed, always with a little note tucked inside. Grayson knew this because Zuri told him, "Mommy writes me notes in my lunch. Today it said, 'I'm her sunshine.'" Zuri beamed when she said it like it was the greatest treasure in the world, and maybe it was. One evening, Grayson sat on his back porch after Brenda and Zuri had gone inside. The light in their kitchen was on. He could see Brenda moving around, cleaning up, getting things ready for the next day. Always getting ready for the next day. She never stopped. And a thought settled into Grayson's mind so clearly it almost startled him. She wasn't struggling because she was weak. She was surviving because she was stronger than anyone he'd ever met in a boardroom. 2 weeks after Grayson moved in, Brenda's front steps gave up. The bottom board had been soft for a while, and one morning it just cracked clean through. Lorraine nearly twisted her ankle stepping on it. Grayson saw the whole thing from his kitchen window. Before he could think it through, he was at her door. "I can fix that for you." Brenda looked at him. Then she looked at the steps. Then she looked back at him. "Have you ever fixed a step before?" "No." "But how hard can it be?" Brenda crossed her arms. Famous last words. She let him try. She even lent him her toolbox, which was better organized than anything Grayson had ever owned. He spent 2 hours on those steps. He measured wrong twice. He bent 3 nails. He hit his thumb so hard he saw stars. The final result was a step that was functional, but looked like it had been installed during an earthquake. Zuri walked out, studied it with her hands on her hips like a tiny building inspector, and said, "My mom could do it better. And she's a nurse." Brenda burst out laughing. Not a polite laugh. Not the kind of laugh women did at cocktail parties when someone told a mediocre joke. This was a full, unguarded, throwing her head back kind of laugh. It was loud and unpolished, and it was the most honest sound Grayson had heard in years. He stood there with a sore thumb and a crooked step and thought, I want to hear that sound every day. After the steps, something shifted. Zuri decided that Grayson was hers now. Every afternoon after kindergarten, there'd be a knock on his door. 3 small knocks, always in the same pattern. Grayson would open it, and Zuri would be standing there, backpack still on, hair slightly coming undone from whatever style Lorraine had put it in that morning. Can I come in every day? Same question, same enormous brown eyes. Lorraine would appear behind her, apologetic. Zuri, baby, leave the man alone. But Grandma, he doesn't have a dog. He needs company. Grayson started keeping juice boxes in his fridge. He didn't even drink juice. He bought them because Zuri liked the apple ones. He told himself it was just being a good neighbor. He told himself it was just convenience. He told himself it didn't mean anything. But every afternoon he started listening for those 3 little knocks. And when 4 o'clock came and he hadn't heard them yet, he'd feel something drop in his chest. Something uncomfortably close to disappointment. One afternoon, Zuri was sitting on his couch, drawing with crayons he'd bought specifically for her visits, though he'd never admit that when she looked up at him and said, Are you sad? Grayson blinked. What? You look sad sometimes, like when you sit on your porch at night. He didn't know what to say. A 5-year-old had just seen right through him. All those business associates, all those women his father had paraded in front of him, all those people who supposedly knew him. None of them had ever asked that question. Not once. Sometimes I am, he said quietly. Zuri nodded, like this was a perfectly reasonable answer. Then she went back to her drawing. A minute later, she tore the page out and handed it to him. It was 3 stick figures. A tall one, a medium one, and a tiny one. That's you, that's Mommy, and that's me. Grayson looked at that drawing and something cracked open inside him. Something he'd been holding shut for a very long time. That Friday, Brenda knocked on his door around 6. Hey, I made too much food. You want to come eat? I hate leftovers. Grayson knew she hadn't made too much food. Brenda measured everything carefully. He'd seen her at the grocery store comparing prices, using coupons, putting things back on the shelf when they cost too much. She hadn't accidentally made extra. She'd made extra on purpose. For him. He walked into her kitchen and the smell hit him like a wall. Baked chicken, mac and cheese, collard greens with ham hock, cornbread on the counter. The whole house smelled like warmth. Zuri was already at the table, kneeling on her chair, because she was too short to sit properly. She patted the seat next to her. Sit here. I saved you the good spot. Grayson sat down. Brenda set a plate in front of him, piled high with food. He took one bite of the chicken and closed his eyes. This is incredible. It's my mama's recipe. Nothing fancy. He ate 2 full plates. Brenda watched him with an amused smile. You eat like you've never had a home-cooked meal. Grayson paused his fork halfway to his mouth. The truth hit him right there at that small kitchen table with the wobbly leg and the mismatched chairs. He hadn't, not since his mother died. 18 years of private chefs and 5-star restaurants and catered events, and not one of those meals had ever tasted like this. Maybe I haven't, he said softly. Not a real one. Something passed across Brenda's face. Understanding. Not pity. Not curiosity. Just the quiet recognition of one lonely person seeing another. Well, she said gently, you're welcome here any time. Zuri raised her juice box. Cheers. Grayson clinked his water glass against her juice box and felt something he couldn't name. Something warm and terrifying and completely new. Like standing at the edge of a cliff, not falling. Just realizing that maybe for the first time he wanted to jump. But the world Grayson had left behind was not done with him. Not even close. 3 weeks after Grayson moved to Kirkwood, Graham Whitmore's phone rang. It was his executive assistant, a sharp woman named Vivian Cole, who had worked for Graham for 12 years and knew better than to call after 8 p.m. unless it was important. Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know. Grayson has purchased a property. Graham set down his scotch. He's been looking at investment properties. That's fine. It's not an investment property, sir. It's a townhouse in Kirkwood. He's living there. Kirkwood. Graham knew the neighborhood. Working class. Modest homes. The kind of place where people hung laundry on clotheslines and kids played in the street. It was not where a Whitmore lived. Get me everything on his situation. I want to know who's around him. 2 days later, a manila folder landed on Graham's desk. The private investigator's report was thorough. Brenda Thompson, age 28. Single mother. 1 child, age 5. Divorced. Former husband, Darnell Thompson. Whereabouts mostly unknown. Employed as a registered nurse at a community health clinic. Annual income, approximately $52,000. Current address, the townhouse directly adjacent to the one Grayson had purchased. Graham read the file with the same clinical precision he used to evaluate business acquisitions. Single mother, low income, no family money, no connections. A nurse at a free clinic. This was not someone who belonged in the Whitmore orbit. He picked up his phone. Grayson, my office, tomorrow morning, 9 sharp. The next morning, Grayson walked into the Whitmore Industries headquarters for the first time in weeks. The lobby felt cold. The elevator ride to the 38th floor felt longer than he remembered. Everything in this building was glass and steel and sharp angles. No warmth, no color, no little girl asking about dogs. Graham was sitting behind his massive oak desk. He didn't stand when Grayson walked in. He gestured to the chair across from him like he was seating a client. Sit down. I'll stand. Graham's jaw tightened. Fine. Then I'll be direct. I know about the house. I know about the neighborhood. And I know about the woman. Her name is Brenda. I know her name. I know her income. I know her credit score. I know she has a child from a failed marriage and an ex-husband who disappeared. I know everything I need to know. You don't know anything about her dad. Graham leaned forward. I know risk when I see it, Grayson. I've spent 40 years calculating risk. This woman is a liability. What does she bring to the table? No assets, no family infrastructure, no safety net. You're a Whitmore. You need someone who can match what you bring. She brings everything you can't buy, Dad. She brings honesty. She brings kindness. She brings a 5-year-old who asks me if I'm sad because no one else in my entire life has ever bothered to notice. Let me pause here for a moment. Because what Graham was doing, whether he realized it or not, was something that happens every day in this country. He wasn't evaluating Brenda as a person. He was evaluating her as a balance sheet. Her worth in his eyes was measured in dollars and social standing, not in character, not in how she treated people, not in the fact that she got up at 5:15 every single morning to care for strangers and then came home and cared for her own child with whatever energy she had left. Graham looked at Brenda and saw a single black mother with no money. He didn't see a woman. He saw a category. And that right there is how prejudice works. It doesn't always announce itself with hatred. Sometimes it wears a suit and calls itself pragmatism. Graham stood up. His face was stone. I'm going to say this once, Grayson. If you continue down this path, you are out. Out of the company. Out of the trust. Out of the inheritance. Every share, every account, every door that has ever been opened for you because of this family's name, all of it closes. Do you understand? The room was silent. The Atlanta skyline stretched out behind Graham through the floor-to-ceiling windows, 40 stories up, a view that cost billions to build, and between father and son, a gap that no amount of money could bridge. Grayson looked at his father for a long time. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his company ID badge, and set it on the desk, then closed them. He turned and walked toward the door. You walk out that door, you don't come back, Graham called after him. Grayson didn't turn around. He didn't hesitate. He walked out of that office for the second time, but this time he wasn't coming back. The consequences came fast, faster than Grayson had expected. By Monday morning, his corporate credit cards were declined. He found out at a gas station standing at the pump with his car half full, watching the screen flash card, declined in bright red letters. He had to pay with cash. He barely had enough. By Wednesday, his access to the family trust fund was frozen. An email from the family's attorney, formal, cold, per the directive of Graham A. Whitmore. All distributions from the Whitmore Family Trust to Grayson E. Whitmore are hereby suspended, effective immediately. By Friday, his key card no longer worked at the Whitmore Tower. Security had been informed. His name had been removed from the company directory. 32 years of being a Whitmore, and it took less than a week to erase him. Grayson sat at his kitchen table and did the math. He had $180,000 in a personal savings account. That was it. No income, no investments he could access, no safety net. $180,000 sounded like a lot until he started counting. Mortgage on the townhouse, utilities, car insurance, food, healthcare because his company health plan was gone now too. At his current burn rate, he had maybe 14 months before the money ran out. He needed a job. Simple enough. He had a degree from Emory. He had 10 years of experience in commercial real estate. He knew the Atlanta market inside and out. Hiring managers should have been fighting over him. But the Whitmore name worked differently now. It wasn't a door opener anymore. It was a warning sign. Grayson sent his resume to 9 real estate firms in Atlanta. 2 of them responded. Both said the same thing in different words. We appreciate your interest, but we're not in a position to move forward at this time. Translation: we're not crossing Graham Whitmore. Not for his son, not for anyone. No one would touch him. And then there was the other problem. The quieter one. The one that embarrassed Grayson more than he wanted to admit. He didn't know how to live. He didn't know how to cook. His first attempt at making pasta resulted in a kitchen full of smoke and noodles stuck to the bottom of a pot like cement. He didn't know how to do laundry. He turned 1 load of whites pink because he'd thrown in a red t-shirt he'd bought at a Kirkwood yard sale. He didn't know which day the electricity bill was due. He didn't know how to unclog a drain. He didn't know the price of milk. He had managed $50 million deals. He could not manage a grocery list. And through all of this, Brenda was right next door. Kind, warm, completely unaware. She knew him as Grayson, the new neighbor. The guy who was bad at fixing steps and didn't own a dog. She knew he used to work in real estate and was taking a break. That's what he'd told her, taking a break. As if losing your entire identity was something you did on purpose. He hadn't told her the truth. Not about his father, not about the money, not about the name on the buildings downtown. He told himself he was protecting her. He told himself it was too complicated to explain. He told himself the timing wasn't right. But the real reason was simpler and harder to admit. He was afraid. Afraid that if Brenda knew who he really was, she'd look at him differently, the way everyone else did. And he couldn't bear that. Not from her. For the first time in his life, Grayson Wellington Whitmore was ordinary, and it terrified him. It was Brenda who noticed first. She came over one morning to return a measuring cup she'd borrowed and found Grayson standing in his kitchen, staring at a pan of eggs like they'd personally betrayed him. The eggs were black on the bottom. Smoke was curling up toward the ceiling. The smoke detector was beeping. And Grayson was just standing there, spatula in hand, looking defeated. Grayson, the eggs, I know. They're on fire, I know. Brenda walked past him, turned off the stove, opened the window and fanned the smoke with a dish towel. Zuri appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, holding her stuffed bunny. Even I can make eggs, Zuri said. And I'm 5. Brenda bit her lip to keep from laughing. Then she looked at Grayson, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected. He wasn't just bad at cooking. He was lost. The kind of lost that goes deeper than a burned breakfast. Okay, she said, rolling up her sleeves. We're fixing this, right now. She went home and came back with a carton of eggs, butter, salt, and a non-stick pan. Zuri followed, climbing up onto the kitchen counter like she owned the place. And for the next hour, Brenda taught Grayson how to cook eggs. Not fancy eggs, just eggs, scrambled. She showed him how much butter to use, how to keep the heat low, how to stir gently instead of attacking the pan like it owed him money. Low and slow, she said. That's the secret. You can't rush eggs, Grayson. They'll punish you. He laughed. She laughed. Zuri ate 3 pieces of toast and offered commentary from her perch on the counter. More butter, mister. Mommy always says, more butter. It was the most normal morning Grayson had ever had, and it was the beginning of something he didn't expect. Over the next 2 weeks, Brenda became his teacher. Not formally, not on purpose. It just happened naturally, the way neighbors help neighbors. One evening, she found out he had no system for tracking his money. No budget, no spreadsheet, nothing. He was just spending until the number in his bank account went down and then feeling anxious about it. Brenda stared at him. You don't have a budget. I've never needed one before. Everyone needs a budget, Grayson. That's like saying you've never needed to breathe before. She pulled out her old laptop, the screen slightly cracked in one corner, and opened a spreadsheet she'd built for herself. It was color-coded, rent in red, groceries in green, Zuri's expenses in purple, savings in blue, every dollar accounted for. This is what I use, she said. It's simple. Income goes here, fixed expenses here, variable expenses here. And this column, this is the most important one. This is what you pay yourself first. Pay myself first. Before you pay rent, before you pay anything, you take a percentage and put it somewhere you won't touch it. Even if it's just $50, that's your emergency fund. That's your safety net. Because life doesn't wait until you're ready to throw something at you. And here's something worth understanding. Financial literacy, the basic ability to manage your own money, is not taught in most schools. Nearly 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, not because they're irresponsible, because no one ever sat them down and showed them how money actually works. Budgeting isn't complicated, but if nobody teaches you, it might as well be calculus. Brenda learned it the hard way. Through overdraft fees and late payment penalties, and one terrifying month when she had $11 in her account and 6 days until payday, she built her system out of necessity. And now she was sharing it with a man who used to oversee projects worth more than most neighborhoods. Grayson sat there looking at her spreadsheet, and a thought struck him so hard it almost hurt. He had managed billion-dollar projects. He had overseen budgets that had more zeros than he could count. But he had never, not once, managed his own money. Someone else had always done it. Accountants, financial advisors, his father's team. Grayson had never paid a utility bill in his life. He'd never compared prices at a grocery store. He'd never felt the specific anxiety of watching his bank balance drop and knowing there was no safety net underneath. I feel stupid, he said quietly. You're not stupid, Brenda said firmly. You just never had to learn this. There's a difference. Now you're learning. That's not stupid. That's brave. She spent the rest of the evening building him his own spreadsheet. She showed him how to track every purchase, how to set spending limits for categories, how to plan for irregular expenses like car maintenance and doctor visits. Zuri fell asleep on the couch halfway through, her bunny tucked under her chin. At one point, Grayson shook his head and said, How do you do all of this? Work full-time, raise Zuri, manage every dollar, and still show up for your neighbors. How Brenda closed the laptop and looked at him. Because nobody else is going to do it for me. That's how. She said it simply. No bitterness, no self-pity, just fact. Then she added something that Grayson would carry with him for the rest of his life. Money doesn't teach you how to live, Grayson. Life does. He walked her and sleeping Zuri back to their house that night, stood on her porch for a moment after she went inside. The streetlight buzzed overhead. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Normal sounds. Ordinary life. His father had taught him how to build a company. Brenda was teaching him how to build a life. And for the first time, Grayson understood which one mattered more. The weeks that followed moved slowly. Not in a bad way. In the way that good things take their time. Like bread rising. Like seasons changing. Like two people finding each other without rushing. Grayson started driving Zuri to school on the mornings Brenda had early shifts. It began as a practical arrangement. Lorraine had a doctor's appointment one Tuesday and couldn't come until 9. Brenda was frantic, trying to figure out who could take Zuri to school by 7:45. "I'll do it," Grayson said. "I don't start work until 9. He had found a job by then. Not a corner office, not a VP title, a project manager position at a small construction company in East Atlanta called Redline Builders. The owner, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia Haynes, had never heard of Graham Whitmore and didn't care about the name on anyone's resume. She cared about whether you could coordinate a job site and meet a deadline. Grayson could. He was good at it. And the salary was $65,000 a year. Less than a tenth of what he used to make. But it was his. He'd earned it by walking in and interviewing like everyone else. When he told Brenda about the job, she actually clapped. Both hands. A real clap. Like he'd won something important. 65,000. Grayson, that's amazing. It's not exactly what I'm used to. It's yours. You earned it. That's better than what you're used to. So on that Tuesday morning, Grayson drove Zuri to kindergarten in his car, which was now a used Honda Civic he'd bought for $8,000 cash. Zuri sat in the back in her booster seat, narrating the entire drive. Turn left here. No, the other left. Mommy goes this way. Do you know my teacher's name? It's Miss Angela. She has a turtle. His name is Franklin. When they pulled up to the school, Zuri unbuckled herself and grabbed her backpack. Then she turned to Grayson. Are you picking me up too? If your mom says it's okay, she will. I'll tell her you were very responsible. Grayson watched her run into the school, puffball ponytails bouncing. The teacher at the door looked at him curiously. You must be Zuri's. I'm a friend of her mom's. Zuri turned around and yelled across the courtyard. That's Grayson. He burns eggs, but he's getting better. After that, Grayson drove Zuri to school every Tuesday and Thursday. It became routine. And routine, Grayson was discovering, was something he'd never had before but desperately needed. Then came the night everything shifted. It was 11:30 on a Wednesday. Grayson was reading on the couch when his phone rang. Brenda's name on the screen. Grayson. Her voice was tight. Controlled, but barely. Zuri has a fever. 103.4. It won't come down. I need to take her to the emergency room, but my car won't start. He was at her door in 90 seconds. Brenda was holding Zuri wrapped in a blanket. The little girl's face was flushed, her eyes glassy, her body limp against her mother's chest. She looked so small. Let's go, Grayson said. Nothing else. Just let's go. He drove to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. Brenda sat in the back with Zuri in her lap, whispering to her, stroking her forehead. Grayson drove carefully, but fast, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. At the hospital, they waited. That's what emergency rooms are. Waiting rooms. They sat in plastic chairs under fluorescent lights, surrounded by other worried parents and crying children, and the smell of antiseptic. Zuri was given medicine, and eventually her fever started to come down. She fell asleep in Grayson's arms, her head against his chest, her small hand gripping the collar of his shirt. Brenda, exhausted, leaned her head against Grayson's shoulder. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. They just sat there. 3 people in a hospital waiting room, at 2 in the morning, holding each other up. And in that silence, Grayson felt something break open inside him. Not break apart, break open. Like a door that had been locked for years, finally swinging wide. He told himself it was just neighborly concern. He told himself he was just helping out. He told himself it was friendship. But when Zuri fell asleep in his arms, her small fingers clutching his shirt, and Brenda leaned into him like he was the only solid thing in the room, he stopped lying to himself. He was in love with her, completely, terrifyingly, undeniably. The next week, Lorraine came by Brenda's house while Grayson was helping Zuri build a Lego castle in the living room. Brenda was in the kitchen. Lorraine watched Grayson through the window for a long moment. Then she went to her daughter. That man looks at you like your father used to look at me. Brenda paused, her hands still wet from washing dishes. Mama, don't start. I'm not starting anything. I'm just telling you what I see. And what I see is a man who drove your daughter to the hospital at midnight and sat in that waiting room like she was his own child. A man who shows up every day without being asked. Brenda was quiet. Her eyes were wet. Your daddy wasn't rich, baby, but he was present. And that was worth more than anything. Don't let this one go because you're scared. Brenda wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm not scared, Mama. Yes, you are. And that's okay. Just don't let the fear win. But love, real love, doesn't exist in a vacuum. And there was a truth Grayson still hadn't told Brenda. A truth that could destroy everything. It happened on a Thursday evening. The air was warm. Spring was turning into summer. Grayson asked Brenda to walk with him to the small park at the end of their street. Zuri was with Lorraine. The fireflies were just starting to come out, blinking on and off in the darkening trees like tiny heartbeats. They walked side by side, their hands brushed. Brenda didn't pull away, neither did Grayson. After a while, he took her hand. She let him. They sat on a bench near the old oak tree at the center of the park. For a few minutes, they just sat, listening to the crickets, watching the fireflies, being still. Then Grayson said, Brenda, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything. She turned to look at him. His face was serious, more serious than she'd ever seen it. Okay. He took a breath, a long one. My last name isn't just Whitmore. It's Whitmore, as in Whitmore Industries, as in Graham Whitmore's son, as in the buildings downtown with my family's name on them. Brenda's hand went still in his. I was the vice president of the company until a few months ago. I had a trust fund, a penthouse in Buckhead, and more money than I knew what to do with. My father cut me off because I chose to be here, in Kirkwood, near you. He paused. Brenda hadn't moved. Her face was unreadable. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to know the real me. Not the name, not the money, just me. And I know that's not a good enough reason. I know I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry. The silence lasted 10 seconds. It felt like 10 years. Then Brenda pulled her hand away. So everything we had, she said, and her voice was quiet, but it had an edge. Like a blade, it was built on a lie. No, Brenda, no. Everything was real. You let me teach you how to budget. You sat at my kitchen table and let me show you a spreadsheet while you used to manage billions of dollars. You let me think you were just some guy who was down on his luck. I was down on my luck. I am down on my luck. You chose this, Grayson. That's not the same thing. I didn't choose to be a single mom making $52,000 a year. I didn't choose to count every dollar. You walked away from money. I never had it to walk away from. Do you understand how different that is? He did. He felt it hit him right in the chest. And Zuri. Brenda's voice cracked. You let my daughter get attached to you. She draws pictures of you. She asks for you every morning. What happens when your daddy snaps his fingers and you go running back to your real life? What do I tell her then? I'm not going back. This is my real life. How do I know that? How do I trust that you've been lying to me since the day we met? And here's something important to understand about trust. It doesn't break all at once. It cracks, slowly, one hidden truth at a time. And once those cracks spread far enough, it doesn't matter how good the intentions were, the foundation is damaged. Grayson had lied for what he believed were the right reasons. He wanted Brenda to see him as he was, not as his net worth. That impulse came from a genuine place. But the road to broken trust is paved with good intentions. Being vulnerable, being honest, even when it's terrifying, that's not weakness. That's the strongest thing a person can do in a relationship. And Grayson had waited too long. Brenda stood up from the bench. Tears were running down her face, but she wasn't sobbing. She was holding herself together the way she always did, quietly, with her jaw set and her shoulders straight. I need space, Grayson. I need to think. Brenda, please, don't. Just don't. She turned and walked away. Her footsteps were steady on the gravel path. She didn't run. She didn't look back. She just walked. And Grayson sat on that bench and watched her go, the fireflies still blinking around him like nothing had happened. The park was empty. The bench was cold. And Grayson understood for the first time what his father must have felt when his mother walked away. Except this time, it was his own fault. Brenda walked into her house and closed the door behind her. quietly, the way you close a door when you're trying to hold yourself together. The hallway was dark. Zuri's shoes were by the mat, the little pink ones with the butterflies. Lorraine had left the kitchen light on and a note on the counter. She ate all her peas tonight, first time ever. Miracle child, love you, baby. Brenda stood in that kitchen for a long time. She didn't move. She just stood there with her hands flat on the counter breathing. She'd been here before, this exact feeling, this hollow sinking weight in her chest. Like the floor had dropped out from under her and she was falling, but no one could see it. Darnell had done this to her. 3 years ago, he'd stood in this same kitchen, leaned against this same counter, and told her he needed to go find himself. Like he was a set of lost car keys. Like the woman standing in front of him holding their daughter wasn't enough of a reason to stay. She remembered the details. She always remembered the details. The way he'd already packed his bag before the conversation started. The way he wouldn't look at Zuri, who was playing on the living room floor, clueless. The way he'd said, "I still love you, Bren," as he walked out the door like love was just a word you said on your way out instead of a reason to stay. Brenda had rebuilt everything after that, alone. She'd picked up extra shifts. She'd found the apartment in Kirkwood. She'd learned to fix things herself because she couldn't afford to pay someone. She'd taught herself to budget down to the dollar. She'd kept Zuri fed and clothed and loved and whole, even when she herself felt broken into pieces so small she couldn't find them all. She had promised herself one thing after Darnell left. Never again. Never again would she let someone close enough to blindside her. Never again would she trust someone with the parts of her that couldn't survive another blow. And then Grayson had walked in, with his burned eggs and his crooked steps and his way of looking at Zuri like she was the most important person in any room. He had slipped past every wall Brenda had built, quietly, gently, without her even noticing until it was too late. And now, this. She wasn't angry that he was rich. She didn't care about the money. She was angry because he'd let her believe something that wasn't true. He'd let her stand in her kitchen and teach him how to track his expenses while he used to sit in boardrooms worth more than her entire neighborhood. He'd let her think they were on equal ground, and they never were. But was that really what hurt, or was it something deeper? Brenda sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd taught Grayson about budgets, the same table where Zuri drew pictures every afternoon. She put her head in her hands and cried, not loud. Quiet tears. The kind that come when you're too tired to make noise. She didn't hear Lorraine come in, but suddenly her mother was there. A warm hand on her back, the sound of the kettle being filled. 2 mugs set on the table. Lorraine didn't ask what happened. She just made tea and sat down. She'd raised a daughter. She knew when to talk and when to wait. After a while, Brenda told her everything. The park, the confession, the billions, the lie. Lorraine listened without interrupting. She sipped her tea. She let Brenda get it all out. Then she set down her mug and spoke. Baby, that man gave up billions for you. Billions. Your ex couldn't even give up a Friday night. Brenda wiped her eyes. It's not about the money, Mama. I know it's not. But hear me out. That man sat in this kitchen and let you teach him things he probably already knew. And you're asking why. So I'm asking you to think about that. Why did he do it? Because he was lying to me. Or because he was afraid. Brenda looked at her mother. Baby, I'm not telling you to forgive him. That's your choice and nobody else's. But I'm asking you to think about why he lied. Was it to hurt you? Did he gain anything from it? Or was he afraid that the moment you found out who he really was, you'd look at him the way everyone else does? Like a bank account with legs. Brenda was quiet. The tea was getting cold. Your daddy lied to me once, Lorraine said softly. Did I ever tell you that? Before we got married, he told me he'd finished high school. He hadn't. He'd dropped out at 16 to work at the plant to help feed his brothers. He was embarrassed. He thought I wouldn't love him if I knew. What did you do? I was mad. Real mad. For about a week. Then I realized something. He didn't lie because he was dishonest. He lied because he thought the truth would make me leave. And that fear, that's not deception, baby. That's a wound. Brenda stared at the table, at the ring stain from Grayson's coffee mug, at the spot where Zuri had scratched the surface with a crayon, at all the tiny marks of a life built in this kitchen. Grayson had lied. That was true. But he hadn't lied to take something from her. He'd lied because he was terrified of losing the only place where he was just Grayson. Not a Whitmore. Not a billionaire's son. Just a man who burned eggs and couldn't fix a step and drove her daughter to school on Tuesday mornings. Lorraine stood up, kissed Brenda on the forehead. "Get some sleep, baby. Things look different in the morning." Brenda didn't call Grayson that night, or the next. But on the third morning, when she saw him sitting on his front steps, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, looking like he hadn't slept in days, she walked over and sat down beside him. She didn't say anything. She just sat there. And sometimes that's enough. They didn't fix everything in a day. That only happens in movies. In real life, trust is rebuilt the way it was broken, one small piece at a time. They started talking again, slowly, carefully, like two people walking on ice, testing every step before putting their full weight down. Grayson told her about Eleanor, about watching his mother die when he was 14, about his father building walls out of money and calling them protection, about growing up in a world where everyone wanted something and no one wanted him. Brenda told him about Darnell, about the day he left, about the months after when she'd work a 12-hour shift and come home and sit on the bathroom floor after putting Zuri to bed because the bathroom was the only room where Zuri couldn't hear her cry, about the shame she felt asking her mother for help, about learning to need no one because needing someone had only ever ended in pain. They sat on those front steps for hours, side by side, telling each other the truth, all of it, the ugly parts, the weak parts, the parts they'd hidden from everyone else. "Let me earn your trust back," Grayson said, "not with money, not with promises, with showing up every day." "That's all I've ever wanted from anyone," Brenda said quietly. "Just show up." And he did. He kept his job at Redline Builders, $65,000 a year. He didn't call his father. He didn't touch whatever money might still be frozen somewhere in a trust account. He wanted to prove something. Not to Graham. Not even to Brenda. To himself. He drove Zuri to school. He came to Brenda's for dinner 3 nights a week. He learned to cook, not well, but edibly. He mowed his lawn and Brenda's on Saturdays. He helped Lorraine carry groceries when she came by. He showed up every single day. One afternoon, Grayson and Zuri were sitting at the kitchen table with a block of modeling clay. Zuri was in her element, tongue sticking out, fingers working furiously. She made 3 figures and lined them up on the table. "That's you," she said, pointing to the tallest one. "That's Mommy, the medium one, and that's me, the smallest." The figures were lumpy, misshapen. The tall one had one arm longer than the other. The small one's head was too big for its body. They were objectively terrible. Grayson picked them up one by one and looked at them. His throat tightened, his eyes burned. "Do you like them?" Zuri asked. "I love them," he said, and his voice cracked when he said it. Brenda was standing in the doorway. She'd seen the whole thing, and when Grayson looked up at her, she smiled, a real smile, the kind that starts slow and stays. 3 clay figures on a kitchen table, worth more than every building with the Whitmore name on it. 11 months. That's how long Graham Whitmore sat alone. Every evening, at exactly 6:30, he walked into the formal dining room of his Buckhead mansion. Mrs. Huang, his housekeeper of 8 years, would have dinner prepared. The table could seat 20. It always had just one place setting now, right at the head. Every evening, Mrs. Huang would ask the same question. "Will Grayson be joining tonight, Mr. Whitmore?" And every evening, Graham would say the same thing. No. 334 times he'd said that word. No. It had gotten easier to say over the months, but harder to swallow. The food was excellent. Mrs. Huang was a wonderful cook. But everything tasted like cardboard when you ate it alone in a room big enough to echo. Graham kept tabs on Grayson through Vivian. He told himself it was just due diligence, monitoring an asset. That's how he framed it in his mind, because framing it any other way would require admitting something Graham wasn't ready to admit. Vivian's reports came every 2 weeks. Grayson had found employment at a small construction company. Salary $65,000. He was driving a used Honda. He was seen regularly with the woman Brenda Thompson and her daughter. He appeared to be in good health. He appeared to be, and Vivian had paused when she said this, happy. That last word had landed on Graham like a stone. Happy. Graham couldn't remember the last time anyone had described his son as happy. Busy, yes. Productive, yes. Impressive, yes. But happy? When had Grayson ever been happy? One night after Mrs. Huang had cleared his untouched dinner, Graham went into his study and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was a photo album. Old. The leather cover cracked and faded. He opened it slowly. The first photo was Eleanor on their wedding day. She'd been beautiful. Not in the polished, perfect way of the society women Graham had tried to set Grayson up with. Beautiful in a way that was warm, present, real. He turned the page. Eleanor holding newborn Grayson. Her face exhausted but radiant. Graham standing next to her, looking terrified and proud at the same time. More pages. Grayson's first steps. Grayson at the beach, covered in sand, laughing with his mouth wide open. Eleanor pushing Grayson on a swing, her hair flying behind her. Then the photos changed. Eleanor in the hospital bed, thin, pale, but still smiling, still reaching for Grayson's hand. The last photo of Eleanor was taken 2 weeks before she died. She was sitting up in bed. Grayson was beside her, 14 years old, trying to look brave. Eleanor's hand was on his cheek. Graham remembered that day. He'd been on a conference call in the next room. He remembered because Eleanor had called him in afterward and said something he'd carried with him ever since, but never truly heard. Don't let him become you, Graham. Let him be himself. He'd nodded. He'd said yes, of course. Then he'd gone right back to building the empire. And Grayson had grown up in its shadow, becoming exactly what Eleanor feared. A copy of his father. Efficient. Successful. Empty. Except now, Grayson had broken free. He'd walked away from the empire. He'd chosen a woman Graham had dismissed as worthless. And according to every report Vivian brought his son, was happier than he'd ever been. Graham closed the album. His hands were shaking. He picked up his phone and called Vivian. I need you to find out more about the woman, Brenda Thompson. I already have the background file, sir. Not the background file. I don't want her credit score or her employment history. I want to know who she is, what she's like, how she treats people. Talk to her neighbors. Talk to the people she works with. Tell me who she is. There was a pause on the line. Then Vivian said, Yes, sir. After he hung up, Graham sat in the dark study for a long time. The house was silent around him. 22 rooms, 6 bathrooms, a wine cellar, a home theater, a pool he hadn't swum in since Eleanor died, and not a single sound except the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Somewhere across the city, in a small kitchen in Kirkwood, his son was probably eating mac and cheese with a 5-year-old who called him by his first name. And Graham Whitmore, worth $4.2 billion, would have traded every penny for a seat at that table. Graham Whitmore had won every deal he'd ever made, but he was losing the only one that mattered. 2 weeks later, Vivian's report arrived. It was different from the first one. No credit scores, no financial data, just observations, descriptions, stories people had told about Brenda Thompson. Her co-workers at the clinic said she was the first person to volunteer for the shifts nobody wanted, holidays, weekends, the overnight when the waiting room filled up with people who had nowhere else to go. She never complained. She brought donuts on Fridays. Her neighbors said she checked on Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman down the street, every single day, brought her groceries when the weather was bad, fixed her mailbox when it fell off the post. The kindergarten teacher said Brenda was the most involved parent she'd seen in 15 years of teaching. She came to every event. She read to the class once a month. And the little notes she packed in Zuri's lunch were something the other kids had started asking about. Why doesn't my mom write me notes? One child had asked. Graham read the report twice. Then he set it down and stared out the window at his perfectly manicured lawn. He'd been wrong. Not partially wrong. Not wrong about the details. Wrong about everything. The next Saturday morning, Graham did something he hadn't done in 40 years of wealth. He drove himself. No driver. No security. Just Graham, in a car that cost more than most of the houses on the street he was headed to. He parked 3 blocks from Grayson's townhouse. Close enough to see. Far enough not to be noticed. He turned off the engine and sat there. It was 10 in the morning. The street was alive with the kind of noise that expensive neighborhoods never had. Kids riding bikes. Someone's music playing from an open window. A man washing his car in the driveway, waving to a jogger passing by. Then Graham saw them. Grayson was in his front yard, trying to fix a section of the chain-link fence between his house and Brenda's. He was doing a terrible job. The fence leaned to one side like it was tired, but he kept working, wiping sweat from his forehead, measuring and remeasuring. Brenda was in her yard, watering the small garden she'd planted along the fence line. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs. She was wearing an old t-shirt and shorts, and she was humming something Graham couldn't hear through the closed car windows. And Zuri. Zuri was everywhere, running between both yards, talking to the cat next door, spinning in circles on the sidewalk until she got dizzy and fell on the grass laughing. Graham watched. He couldn't look away. Then it happened. Zuri tripped on the edge of the sidewalk. She went down hard knees first and let out a cry that cut through the morning air. Brenda turned immediately, dropping the hose. But Grayson was closer. He was there in 3 steps. He scooped Zuri up like she weighed nothing, her legs dangling, her face buried in his shoulder. Let me see, Grayson said, sitting on the porch step with Zuri on his lap. Her knee was scraped, a little blood, not serious. But she was crying the way kids cry. Big tears. End of the world tears. Grayson carried her inside. A minute later, he came back out with a wet cloth, a box of Band-Aids, and of all things, a popsicle. He cleaned Zuri's knee gently. Put the Band-Aid on with more care than Graham had ever seen anyone handle anything. Then he handed her the popsicle. Zuri sniffled, took a bite, looked down at the Band-Aid. Is it the one with the dinosaurs? The one with the dinosaurs? She smiled through her tears. Okay, I'm brave now. Brenda was standing behind them, her hand on Grayson's shoulder. Not helping, not taking over, just there. Graham sat in his car and felt tears running down his face. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cried. Maybe at Eleanor's funeral. Maybe not even then. His son was kneeling on a porch, putting a dinosaur Band-Aid on a child who wasn't his, treating her scraped knee like it was the most important thing in the world. And in that moment, it was. Because being present for the small things is what turns a stranger into family. Here's something that researchers have known for decades, but that most people still don't fully understand. When it comes to a child's development, emotional availability matters more than financial provision. Studies from the National Institute of Child Health have shown that children with emotionally present caregivers develop stronger attachment security, better emotional regulation, and higher resilience, regardless of income level. It's not about what you buy them. It's about whether you're there when they fall down. Graham had provided everything money could buy: the best schools, the best doctors, the best clothes, but he'd never put a Band-Aid on Grayson's knee. He'd never sat with his son after a bad dream. He'd never been the one Grayson reached for when he was scared. Graham had spent 40 years believing that providing meant earning. Watching his son put a Band-Aid on a child's knee with more tenderness than Graham had ever shown anyone, he finally understood. Providing means being present. Graham Whitmore stood on the sidewalk in Kirkwood for a full 3 minutes before he moved. He'd driven himself again. No driver, no security. Just a 68-year-old man in a pressed shirt standing in front of a townhouse that was smaller than his garage, trying to remember how to breathe. He knocked. The sound was louder than he expected, or maybe the street was just that quiet. Footsteps inside. The door opened, and there was Grayson, thinner than Graham remembered, a little tanned, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that had a small bleach stain on the hem. He looked like a completely different person. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with 11 months of silence, 11 months of phone calls not made, Birthdays missed, Sundays spent alone. "Dad, can I come in?" Grayson didn't answer right away. He stood in the doorway, his hand on the frame, and Graham could see him deciding. The weight of it, the risk of it. Then Grayson stepped aside. The living room was small. A couch, a coffee table, a bookshelf made of cinder blocks and wooden planks. On the walls, taped at a child's height, were crayon drawings, stick figures and houses, and a purple dog. Fresh flowers sat in a mason jar on the windowsill. The place smelled like something good cooking in the kitchen. Graham looked around the room and felt something twist in his chest. This wasn't a showroom. This wasn't curated. This was a home, a real one. The kind that had fingerprints on the walls and shoes piled by the door and a blanket crumpled on the couch from someone's nap. Brenda came out of the kitchen. She was wiping her hands on a dish towel. She stopped when she saw Graham. Her face went still. Not hostile. Not welcoming. Just still. Grayson stood between them. "Dad, this is Brenda. Brenda, this is my father. Graham." Brenda didn't extend her hand. Graham didn't expect her to. "Please," Grayson said quietly. "Sit down." They sat. Graham on the couch, Brenda in the chair across from him. Grayson beside his father but angled toward Brenda, protecting her without touching her. Graham noticed that, the way his son positioned himself, like a shield. Graham looked at Brenda. She looked back. Her eyes were steady, clear. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't intimidated. She was waiting. "I owe you an apology, miss." "Brenda." "Brenda." Graham paused. He'd given speeches to shareholders. He'd negotiated with senators. But this was the hardest thing he'd ever had to say. "I owe you an apology. I judged you without knowing you. I read a file about your life, and I thought I understood who you were. I didn't. I used words about you that I'm ashamed of. Words I won't repeat because they don't deserve to be said again. And I almost cost my son the best thing that ever happened to him." He stopped. His hands were clasped between his knees. His jaw was tight. Brenda was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was calm, measured, but underneath, it was something sharp, something earned. "Mr. Whitmore, your words didn't just hurt Grayson. They hurt me. I never heard them, but I felt them. Every time your son flinched when his phone rang. Every time he looked at me like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I felt them." She leaned forward slightly. "You looked at my life on paper and decided I wasn't enough. A single mother, a nurse, a woman from Kirkwood. And I need you to understand something. Your words told me that no matter how hard I work, no matter how early I get up, no matter how good a mother I am, someone like me will never be enough for someone like you." Graham didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. He sat there and took it, every word. "And the worst part," Brenda continued, "is that for a second I believed you. For 1 second I thought maybe he's right. Maybe I'm not enough. And then I looked at my daughter sleeping in her bed, and I remembered. I have always been enough. With or without your approval." The room was silent. A clock ticked somewhere in the kitchen. Graham's eyes were wet. He blinked, hard. "You're right," he said. His voice was rough, like the words were being dragged out of him. "You're right about all of it. And I'm sorry. Not the kind of sorry that expects forgiveness. The kind of sorry that knows it doesn't deserve it." And here's something worth understanding about moments like this. In family therapy, there's a concept called repair. It's the idea that an apology isn't a single event. Saying sorry doesn't reset the clock. Repair is a process. It means showing up again and again. It means changing the behavior, not just regretting the words. It means proving through action over time that the harm was recognized and the pattern has broken. Graham was at the beginning of that process. One apology in a small living room. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. The tension in the room was so thick you could feel it pressing against your skin. Grayson was staring at the floor. Brenda was looking at Graham with eyes that held hurt and something else. Something that might, in time, become something like respect. And then the door to the hallway burst open. Zuri ran in like a tiny hurricane, ponytails bouncing, socks sliding on the wood floor. She skidded to a stop when she saw the stranger on the couch. She looked at Graham, head tilted, eyes wide, studying him the way only children study people, without pretense, without agenda, just pure curiosity. "Are you Grayson's daddy?" Graham looked at this little girl, 5 years old, missing one front tooth, chocolate smudge on her chin, looking at him like he was a puzzle she wanted to solve. "Yes," Graham said, and his voice broke on that one word. "I'm Grayson's daddy. He talks about you." "He does." "Yeah. He says you're really smart, but you don't always understand things." Zuri shrugged as if this was a perfectly normal observation. Then she brightened. "You should come to dinner. Grayson makes terrible eggs, but Mommy's chicken is really good." Brenda's face softened. "Not all the way, but enough." "Zuri baby, go. Wash your hands. Can he stay for dinner?" Brenda looked at Graham. Really looked at him. Not at the billionaire. Not at the man who'd tried to end her relationship. At the father sitting on her couch, with tears on his face, trying to find his way back to his son. "Yes," she said. "He can stay." Zuri pumped her fist. "Yes, I'll set another plate. We only have the ones with flowers on them, though." "That's fine," Graham said. "I like flowers." They ate in the kitchen. Brenda's baked chicken, mac and cheese, collard greens, cornbread. The table was a folding table with a tablecloth that had a small stain in one corner. The chairs didn't match. Zuri sat on a phone book to reach her plate. Graham ate slowly, carefully, tasting every bite. Mrs. Huang was an excellent cook. 5-star restaurants were available to him any night of the week. But this food, this simple homemade food served on flower plates at a folding table, tasted different. It tasted like something he'd been missing for a very long time. Zuri talked through the entire meal. About school, about Franklin the turtle, about the dog she was definitely getting someday. Graham listened to every word, and for the first time in years, he wasn't checking his phone under the table. He wasn't thinking about contracts or acquisitions or market trends. He was just there, present, listening to a 5-year-old describe in extraordinary detail the art of making friendship bracelets. That evening, Graham Whitmore ate baked chicken at a folding table in a kitchen smaller than his closet, and it was the best meal he'd had in 11 months. 1 year later, the wedding was in the backyard. Not a ballroom, not a cathedral. The backyard of the Kirkwood townhouse, with string lights hung between the fence posts and folding chairs borrowed from the church down the street. Brenda wore a simple white dress, not designer, not custom, a dress she'd found at a consignment shop in Decatur for $85. It fit her perfectly. She looked beautiful, not because of the dress, because of the way she smiled when she saw Grayson waiting for her under the old oak tree. Zuri was the flower girl. She took the job extremely seriously. She walked down the aisle, which was really just the garden path, dropping petals with the focus of a surgeon. When she reached the front, she whispered to Grayson, "I didn't spill any." Graham stood beside his son. He was wearing a suit, but not the power suit he wore to board meetings. A simple, gray one. His eyes were red before the ceremony even started. The guest list was small. Lorraine, Mrs. Patterson from down the street, Patricia Haynes, Grayson's boss at Redline, a few of Brenda's co-workers from the clinic, Mrs. Huang, who Graham had given the day off specifically so she could come. About 30 people total. It was the smallest event Graham Whitmore had ever attended. It was also the most important. When Grayson and Brenda exchanged vows, they kept them short. Grayson said, "You taught me how to live. I promised to spend every day being worthy of that." Brenda said, "You showed up every day. That's all I ever needed." Grayson didn't go back to Whitmore Industries. Instead, he started something new. A small company called Foundation Homes. The idea was simple. Use his knowledge of commercial real estate to build affordable housing in neighborhoods that needed it most. Small homes, solid construction, fair prices, the kind of houses where families like Brenda's could actually build a life without drowning in rent. Graham invested. Not because it was his son's company, because for the first time Graham saw a Whitmore project that wasn't about profit margins, When someone asked him why he backed a company that would never make him rich, Graham said, "It's the first smart investment I've made with my heart." Brenda kept working at the clinic. She didn't quit. She loved her patients. She loved the work. And she believed, as she always had, that showing up for people who needed help was not just a job. It was a calling. Graham started coming to dinner every Sunday. He'd pull into the Kirkwood driveway in his car that cost more than the house, carrying a bottle of wine and sometimes a chess set. Zuri had decided she wanted to learn chess. Graham was delighted to teach her. 3 months later, she beat him. Graham stared at the board, then at Zuri, then back at the board. "Checkmate, Grandpa G," Zuri said, grinning so wide her missing tooth showed. Graham leaned back and laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere deep. The kind he hadn't made in years, maybe decades. "Rematch next Sunday," he said. "Only if you practice," Zuri replied. Brenda and Grayson watched from the kitchen doorway. Grayson put his arm around Brenda. She leaned into him. And for a moment, everyone was exactly where they were supposed to be. Grayson didn't inherit a company. He built something better. A family. On a Sunday evening in October, 4 people sat on the front porch of a small townhouse in Kirkwood, Atlanta. The air was cool. The leaves on the old oaks were just starting to turn. The kind of evening where the light goes golden and everything feels slower and softer and more real. Zuri was sitting on the top step, telling a long story about how Franklin, the classroom turtle, had escaped from his tank, and the entire kindergarten class had spent 20 minutes looking for him. He was under Miss Angela's desk the whole time. He's really sneaky for a turtle. Brenda was in the rocking chair, her feet tucked under her, a cup of tea warming her hands. She was laughing. Not the tired laugh of someone who'd worked a 12-hour shift, which she had. The real one. The one that came from a place that was full. Graham sat in the other chair. He was listening, actually listening, not waiting to speak, not checking his watch, just present. His jacket was folded on the railing. His sleeves were rolled up. He looked 10 years younger than he had a year ago. And Grayson. Grayson sat on the porch railing watching all of them. His wife, his daughter, his father, together. In a house that cost less than the watch Graham used to wear. And he thought this is what mom meant. Find someone who makes you laugh at 6 a.m. He'd found her. And she'd given him so much more than laughter. She'd given him a life worth waking up for. The world will always try to tell you who you should love. Marry rich, marry up, marry someone who looks right on paper. And maybe sometimes that works. But this story isn't about what looks right on paper. It's about what feels right in your bones. Brenda Thompson didn't have a trust fund. She didn't have a family name that opened doors. She had a 5-year-old daughter, a nursing degree she'd paid for with double shifts, and a heart so big it had room for a broken man who showed up on her doorstep one Saturday morning, unable to carry a cardboard box. She wasn't a liability. She was the answer. And Grayson Whitmore didn't lose his inheritance. He gained something his inheritance could never buy. A home that smelled like baked chicken on Sunday evenings. A little girl who called him by his first name and beat his father at chess. A woman who loved him, not for what he had, but for who he was willing to become. Single mothers are not beneath anyone. They are the strongest people walking this earth. They work harder. They love fiercer. They build more with less than most people could imagine. And if anyone ever tells you that a woman raising a child alone is not enough, look them in the eye and tell them they don't understand the meaning of the word. Sometimes the person your family says is beneath you is the one who lifts you higher than you've ever been. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next one. Love you. And one last thing before you go. This story is a work of fiction. The names, the characters, the events, all of it is entirely made up. Any resemblance to real people or real situations is purely coincidental. But the feelings are real. The message is real. I wrote this story because I grew up watching people get judged for things they couldn't control, where they came from, how much money they had, whether they had a partner or raised their kids alone. I've seen single mothers work harder than anyone I know and still get looked at like they're not enough, like they're missing something, like their family isn't complete. It is complete. You are complete. If you're a single mom watching this right now, or a single dad, or anyone who's ever been told you're not good enough because of your circumstances, hear me. You are enough. You always have been. The people who can't see that are the ones who are missing something, not you. And if you know a single mom who needs to hear this today, share this video with her. Sometimes a story is just a story, but sometimes it's a mirror. And sometimes seeing yourself reflected back, even in fiction, is the reminder you didn't know you needed. Take care of each other. I'll see you next time.